On Wednesday, the Ministry of National Security presented 2 reports from the investigations into the fatal helicopter incident that happened on February 27th of this year. The first report is a 2-pager from the Bell Company, which is the manufacturer of the aircraft. This report details the damage to the different parts of the helicopter. For instance, it notes that the engine was separated from the aircraft due to impact forces. It also points out that the analysis of the wreckage doesn't show any pre-accident abnormalities. Minister of National Security Michael Perafit told the press on Wednesday that this report is quite similar to the account produced by the Honduran investigators.
To me, it adds nothing new, there are no surprises in there, but I don't expect you to trust me, so you could read it for yourself when we post it online.
Okay, but so is it still pointing to non-mechanical error, to a pilot error? Are those reports still pointing to pilot error?
Well, they don't get into that per se directly. Essentially, they just analyze the aircraft.
The second report is a 5-pager from the Civil Aviation Department. This report establishes the time of departure as 7 minutes after 4 o'clock on Thursday morning and points out, quote, the time of departure is considered as night, as official sunrise had not officially passed, end quote. It also noted that the flight left from an area with clear visibility, that is, near the airport, and went on to an area where there was no light and a body of water over which the helicopter was flying. The lack of night vision capabilities was also pointed out. Like the Honduran Air Force report, it concludes at the time of the accident at 4:30 that morning. This report says that when the helicopter arrived at the clandestine airstrip, it hovered for a short time in the area. This report, unlike the Honduran report, states that the helicopter never landed, but it doesn't state how that piece of information is known. The Honduran report doesn't say if anyone saw the helicopter in sight. It makes reference to someone hearing the sound of the chopper that morning. Both reports say that it was believed that the aircraft had left the area. Again, both reports don't attribute this to a specific source. The report notes that the primary factor in the accident was spatial disorientation. Like the Honduran Air Force Accident Prevention and Investigation Board's document, this latest account speaks about the cold front with rain, thunderstorms, strong winds forecasted for that morning, as well as reduced visibility. But unlike the Honduran report, this account states that the Met report also stated that during 4 a.m. to 4:30 a.m., weather conditions would have been worse than it was forecasted. It concludes that section by pointing out that while Met conditions were unfavorable, it doesn't show that it was a primary cause of the accident, but rather a contributing factor. This report also highlights the issue of lack of night vision equipment as a major contributing factor in this fatal crash, saying, quote, it severely decreased the flight crew's chances of avowing the terrain while carrying out low-altitude, high-risk operations, leaving them to rely only on their human sensory capability, end quote. What was really the point of that helicopter out there if you don't have the equipment to see, the conditions are poorly, are poor out there, then what kind of surveillance are you doing really?
Right, so when a pilot is flying, he's either flying with an instrument under instrument flight rules or he's flying under visual flight rules. Under the visual flight rules, he's doing his naked eyes. And this is where the discretion of the pilot will determine if he flies or not. And in this case, he was hovering over the area of operation. He was seeing the area of operation. He was reporting back to the JAC. It was an authorized and controlled operation, unlike what you think. It was an authorized deployment, and they were providing that information back into the JAC.
We're talking about a drug plane with possibly narco-traffickers on board. Armed people on board, and you go there just relying on your eyesight,
Yes, actually, the visual flight rules provides you with a broader scope of safety than flying on mere instrument flying rules. As a matter of fact, you're preferred to fly with visual flight rules until the conditions are no longer favorable. Then you'll have to switch to your instruments. So by safety standards, flying with the naked eye, especially in those operations where you're required to be closer to the ground, etc., that's the preferred routes that they would fly under.
But in this case, they didn't even have the equipment to rely on if their eyesight, may fail then, so to speak, out there, or they couldn't see. They didn't even have the equipment to back up. to support them. And so I don't know if you're able to answer that, or that's probably going to be answered as a part of the internal
So
investigation.
it's
I'm not
definitely
sure.
one of the issues that we're looking at in terms of the investigation. That's one of the main lines of investigation that we're looking into, in trying to determine the conditions that were necessary for the pilot to be able to fly, and what he was required. So from what we've recovered from some of the force standing orders, and then the flying orders, perhaps outdated, but there's no stipulated mandatory night vision device for you to fly.
So in conclusion, this preliminary report from the Civil Aviation Department investigators say that review of all information and evidence gathered suggests that the combination of weather conditions, little operational flight crew experience, and human factors were major contributing factors in the crash. Added to that, quote, affected by organizational pressure to fulfill the mission, end quote, perhaps led the chopper to fly into poor weather conditions, end quote. Due to poor operational risk management, this action resulted in flight crews suffering from spatial disorientation, end quote. All these things, according to this report, led the helicopter to be put in an unusual position, which caused the crew to lose control, thus killing the 4 soldiers. We note that other investigations into this incident are still ongoing, but we asked General Stephen Ortega of the B.D.F. why there was no risk assessment done by the commander of operations. Somebody who basically serves in an advisory position, is he included in all operations, or are there certain operations that he's excluded from?
He's normally included in all, dependent on time constraint.
Was he included in this particular?
No, he wasn't.
Is there a specific reason why he wasn't included?
Availability.
Availability. And if he is not there to advise, is there anyone in place who would fill that role to advise?
Yes, there would. But if you notice what time this operation happened.
But military sources say that a risk assessment should have been done and could have been done that very same morning. They say checks like those can be done, quote unquote, quick or quote unquote deliberate, which means the process can be done in some minutes and go for over hours, depending on the situation. If you recall, on February 28, when the wreckage was found, Minister Perfeet outlined a timeline where Jayuk made contact with General Ortega around 1:30 that morning. Jayuk then made contact with Ramirez around 7 minutes later. Around 2:18, Ortega got a briefing from Jayuk about the mission. At 2:22 and later at 3:17, Ortega communicated with Ramirez. And then, according to the ministry's timeline, at 3:54, Ramirez signed out the helicopter, and at 4:07, he lifted off. But later during that press conference, when Ortega was asked why the helicopter was heard early that morning from around 2 or so, he claimed that the men were required to do preliminary warm-up and checks. So between 1:38 up to 4 that morning, was there not enough time for an alternate to do a rapid assessment in the absence of the commander of operations? Reporting for News 5, I'm Andrea Polanco.